Okay, welcome to Thoughts and Bolts. This is Consciousness and Metamaterials Part 2. If you have not seen Part 1, please watch Part 1 because that'll provide the greater context for what we're going to talk about today. But if you have seen Part 1, welcome. Now, Metamaterials and Pippa Momgren. That's right. Pippa Momgren was a special assistant to President George W. Bush. She is the daughter of the late, great Harold Momgren, who was a senior aide to four U.S. presidents, okay? Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford. So this man has served his country and, is the insider of insiders. Now, Pippa Momgren wrote an amazing Substack recently where she dropped some UFO bombs with regard to crash retrievals. Now, I recommend you read it on your own. However, if you don't, what she does is she talks about Jeff Cruikshank's work with crash retrievals vis-a-vis some nuclear tests that happened over the Pacific. And then she goes into what her father told her. So we're going to watch Cruikshank's interview first on Need to Know, some gem of a human being, put the test footage overlaid Cruikshank's words. So you get to watch the actual test footage while listening to Crookshank. Okay, so this is whoever did that. Thank you. And let's watch, and it'll bring context to Pippa's Substack post. Okay, so let's watch in here.
In the key event that we have videos of. So there are
Yep.
videos of what we're about to talk about. And when you're referring to those videos, can you actually specifically talk to the video so that our editors know what to include in this video?
Yep. Tensions are building up in Cuba. So there's a Atlas 8F missile test in the Cape Canaveral on the 19th of September 1962. It's a dummy test. There's no live warhead on it. They just want to see how accurate the re-entry vehicle is to the target. Once the re-entry vehicle has separated from the main Atlas missile, it starts its re-entry run. There's pyrotechnics and other things. They call them penetration aids to fool radar. So if you try to shoot the warhead, you've got multiple targets to choose from. Once the penetration aids burn up, the RV is filmed by a high-flying KC-135 specialised aircraft run by EG&G of all people.
So the RV, a re-entry vehicle.
Yep, it's re-entering the atmosphere. It's travelling at Mach 18, which is 20,000 feet per second. And an object materialises right alongside it and paces this RV for a minute and a half. So
how do we know this? What's that source to? Is that an authentic document that sources that claim?
That was it's footage that Arrow has actually deemed a UFO incident, and they've put it in the National Archives. Anyone can see it. And I found
this is the bit I love. Sorry,
report.
Jeff, I've just got to savor this for a moment. So this is a real UFO sighting of some kind of anomalous object that appeared next to the testing of a re-entry vehicle off an ICBM, an American ICBM. And this is traveling at 18 times the speed of sound. And what does this object do around this re-entry vehicle warhead?
It's quite strange because it seems to phase itself into existence and pulse, and then just travels alongside the re-entry vehicle for a minute and a half, and then slowly starts to phase itself out of existence.
So it's clearly intelligently controlled.
Well, yeah. The Americans are scratching their heads now, thinking, is this a Soviet payback for the palladium? Are they doing something to us now? So NASA and the US Air Force are unsure. I found the post-flight test report of that missile test, and they said that the object's origin or identification could not be determined. So they don't know.
But the crucial point is, and I just want to re-emphasize this, ARROW, the Pentagon's UFO investigation office, the official UFO investigation office for the Pentagon, the last thing ARROW ever wants to do is acknowledge that a UFO is real and potentially anomalous, potentially perhaps NHI. But in this case, they've acknowledged that this is a real UAP. They haven't been able to explain it prosaically, and they acknowledge officially in one of their reports that this Atlas RV UAP object is real.
That's right. They put that in the category in the National Archives, UFO category. So we couldn't do that today, Ross, with our technology, let alone in 1962, basically.
No, well, I mean, there's nothing. We have nothing that can fly at 18 times the speed of sound. And this is in the atmosphere too, isn't it? It's not in orbit.
It's just re-entering the atmosphere, yes.
Yeah.
So that's September.
Of that is...
That's in September 1962, in the lead up to the Cuban Missile Crisis. So 24th of October, Strategic Air Command have found the missiles getting moved to Cuba by Khrushchev, the intermediate range ballistic missiles, nuclear tipped. So Strategic Air Command goes to DEFCON 2. That's the only time in history that they've ever done that. So they're ready to go in for a preemptive nuclear strike to the Soviet Union. 17 selected targets, LeMay has called the Grand Tour. They're ready to go. So,
and just to make the point here, if anything validates President Kennedy's concern that whether they're spoofed or whether they're real, like they apparently were in the Atlas test, whatever they are, these UAPs are causing a ramping of the tensions between the Soviet Union and the United States. It's a vindication for JFK's concerns that if the Soviets and the Americans weren't open with each other about UAPs, this could lead to a tragic confrontation where one side fears that the other side is launching some kind of preemptive attack. That's the significance of that UFO that was seen at the Atlas test, correct?
That's correct. Yep.
But then, Jeff, take me forward to what then happens, because there is another test and another set of videos. What do you find? What have you uncovered?
So on the 25th of October, about 15 minutes to midnight, they launched Bluegill Triple Prime, which is a Thor intermediate range ballistic missile, single stage, launches this special, it's called the X1, which is the gold spherical secondary X-ray nuclear weapon. They launch it around, they want to detonate it around midnight to get the maximum effect, because at that point of time in the day, the ionosphere is at its highest point, because it's like a teardrop shape from the Earth in relation to the sun. So this weapon detonates at just a few minutes past midnight on the 26th of October, the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So there's another two KC-135 aircraft. Its whole tests are fully instrumented, because they've never actually fired one of these weapons before, because it's failed the previous 3 times. So there's two KC-135s operated by EG&G, because they developed the special high-speed Rapatronic camera that take the footage, because I believe it's possibly still the same today, the only way to determine a nuclear weapon yield is to watch its expansion rate in the first few microseconds of the detonation. So these two aircraft have got these high-speed cameras watching the detonation. One has the call sign Kettle 1. The other one has the call sign Kettle 2. So during the blast, Kettle 1, you can see an object, and the fireball is approximately only a few milliseconds after the detonation. The fireball is approximately a kilometre wide. A bright, fiery object tumbles out from within the nuclear fireball, and it's plain as day. You can slow it down and see this very bright object. It must be at least 50 to 100 metres long, tumble out from within the nuclear fireball.
You believe that that is some kind of craft.
Just like the one that was following the Atlas 8F test, but this time it was a real warhead.
So this is speculation, of course, because we just simply don't know what was recovered. But you believe potentially there were non-human intelligences of some kind watching these American tests, keeping a very close observation on what was going on, and that because they were using this technology that was designed to knock out missiles with essentially an X-ray pulse, it also knocked out the UFO.
That's correct. The scientists put that detonation in a point in space and time that there was no other debris or aircraft or anything in the local area, because they wanted to see the weapons effects of this X-ray device. Now, what's interesting
Couldn't
is
it be debris from the missile?
No, because the missile is hundreds of kilometres away by that point in time. It's launched 170-kilometre apogee. It's released the re-entry vehicle.
So there you go. There you go. So Crookshanks gives us some good information there, and it's necessary to understanding what Pippa Momgren says in her Substack post. What she says is the following. She's after, praising Crookshanks' work and basically using it to confirm her own memory of what her father told her. She says, the U.S. Navy retrieved the orb out of the ocean. The other video shows the same video, but with a triangle that obscures the view of the orb. I said, so, Dad, you are smack in the middle of a national security emergency. What the heck do you think the orb was? He said, we called them tagalongs. I said, so you knew they weren't Russian? Yes, he said. We knew they were benign. Obviously, the word tagalong means you saw them all the time and you knew they were harmless? Yes, he said. And you never asked what the heck is that thing? He looked a little blank. It was the military. Everything is on a need to know basis. Dad did ask what happened to the orb after the Navy scooped it out of the Pacific. But he was told that despite holding all the Q clearances, he did not need to know. As Crookshank explains, the retrieved orb left a radiation imprint on the Navy ship that retrieved it. My dad said it was the first time we knocked a tagalong out of the sky. It was historic. So he flew out to Albuquerque to be briefed by the head of the Atomic Energy Commission, Lawrence Geis, who apparently received materials from the crashed craft. He kept them on his desk, handed them to my dad, and then asked him to describe how he felt. Dad said a voice began talking to him inside his head. That's all Geis wanted to know. Dad never recalled or would not say what that voice said. Apparently, he said, some people interact with the materials and others don't. That is huge, okay? Because if we go back to American Cosmic with Diana Pasulka and her being, a scholar of religion and being approached by Tim Taylor, he tells her, I'm at the limit of understanding what I can from a materialist perspective. Consciousness is where I need to go to learn what's next. Okay, so this is a NASA engineer, mission control guy, going to the scholar of religion to learn something about consciousness. Okay, and what did he do? Tim Taylor took her out to the Corona saucer crash site. They went digging in the desert with Dr. Gary Nolan from Stanford, and they found memory material like the kind in Roswell. And again, please watch my original video on this for more details. Okay. But Pippa Momgren's father had a psychic interaction with this material. Okay. When he held it in his hand, it acted as the catalyst for some kind of subjective experience. Okay. It affected his consciousness, it affected his mind. Okay. Now, Tim Taylor he visited Chris Bledsoe. Chris Bledsoe Sr. is probably one of the more popular experiencers these days, and he wrote the book UFO of God. And this is Tim Taylor with Chris Bledsoe Sr. at a high school football game where Bledsoe's daughter had been crowned homecoming queen. Okay. And this is what Mr. Bledsoe says about Mr. Taylor. He says, quote, Tim reached into his backpack and pulled out another container. He took another piece of metal out of it. This one, a similar matte, dark gray, but looked a bit wrinkled like aluminum foil. When Tim demonstrated that it had an unusual property, it could be wrinkled and creased in the same manner as tin foil, but afterward could be perfectly smoothed out as if it had never been wrinkled in the first place. With the silver gray piece in my left hand, he placed the second scrap of metal in my right. Out of nowhere, energy jolted through me. My eyes darkened with tunnel vision as if I had just gone into a G-lock in a fighter jet. What is that? I managed to say despite my racing heart. I noticed my forearm pulsing. Why you? Why you? Tim asked. So, in the case of Chris Bledsoe Sr., and in the case of Harold Malmgren, we get two people who held this anomalous material in their hand. In Harold Malmgren's case, it was a crashed UFO that was knocked out of the sky from the Bluegill Triple Prime nuclear test in the Pacific. Okay. In the case of Chris Bledsoe, it was some kind of material that had properties similar to the Roswell material. Okay, and the Roswell material, the scraps that the witnesses talk about, you could crumple it up in your hand, and then when you open your hand, it would unfold itself perfectly black into a sheet of metal. And in Bledsoe's case, like Malmgren's case, it catalyzed some kind of, some kind of psychic reaction, some kind of mental reaction. It affected their mind just by touching it. Okay, that's huge. And that's why you need to watch my first video, Consciousness and Metamaterials, because I lay it all out there how, when you look at experiencers, people who say they've been inside the craft and were allowed by the aliens to fly the craft, they all say that they flew the craft with their mind. And in that video, I talked about the material from the San Agustin crash that Pasulka recovered, the material from the Roswell crash that numerous eyewitnesses handled, and how it was the same type of thing Tim Taylor handed Bledsoe Sr. You crumple it up in your hand, it looks like tinfoil. You open your hand and it, folds right back up. And how, in 1959, less than 10 years after the Roswell crash, the Navy Ordnance Lab developed nitinol. And most importantly, how the Navy Ordnance Lab, the same lab, the White Oak Laboratory, they did psychic experiments with nitinol. They did telekinesis experiments with nitinol. Okay. Now that only makes sense. Why would you do telekinesis experiments with nitinol? Well, if nitinol is the poor man's version of the Roswell material, and the Roswell material is psychokinetic, as we it's similar to the Bledsoe material and the Malmgren material. And if the UFOnauts are flying the craft with their minds, then you would need that kind of material for the user interface. Okay. So that's all in my first video, but Hippo Malmgren's Substack post is huge, especially in light of Bledsoe's experience, and really corroborates what we laid out in the first video. So that's it for now. Until next time, remember, consciousness is not classified. Look inward, and that'll tell you a lot more about what's upward than anything else. Thank you and good night.